Kale was never the kind of man who smiled easily. Even as a boy, he carried something heavy in his eyes, a seriousness that made older men nod at him with respect, and younger ones step back without knowing why. By the time he was 24, he had become the youngest alpha king his bloodline had produced in 300 years. He had earned it. Every scar on his hands, every sleepless night studying old treaties, every hard choice made before the world was even awake, it all led to that throne. He sat on it like it was the only place he was ever meant to be. What no one tells you about power is how cold it runs. The great hall of his palace was always full. Advisors, elders, guards, visitors from distant territories. But at the end of every evening, when the candles burned low and the voices faded, Kale sat alone. He had learned to prefer it that way. Silence didn't ask anything of him. Silence didn't have an agenda. He thought he had everything figured out. Then he went to the northern gathering, and everything he had figured out stopped making sense. The annual gathering brought together alpha families from every corner of the territory. It was part tradition, part politics. A chance to renew old agreements and make new ones over food and carefully chosen words. Kale attended because he was expected to. He moved through the great hall the way he moved through everything, with purpose, with control, with his eyes already looking 3 steps ahead. He was in the middle of a conversation with 2 Eastern elders when he felt it. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a smell. It was something closer to the feeling you get when you realize a room has gone quiet. That small, sharp awareness that something has shifted. He turned his head before his mind caught up with the reason, and that's when he saw her. She was standing near the far wall, talking to someone he didn't recognize. She wore no special colors, carried no title, announced herself with nothing. She was simply there, and somehow, in a hall full of the most powerful people in the territory, she was the only person in the room that his eyes refused to leave. Her name, he would learn later, was Seraphine Voss. She came from the western border clans, small packs that lived close to the land, far from palace politics. She worked as a healer's apprentice. She knew which roots reduced fever and which ones stopped bleeding. She had rough hands and steady eyes, and she laughed easily, which was something Kale noticed because he was not used to being around people who did. For one long moment, across that crowded hall, their eyes met. Something moved inside his chest, deep and quiet, like the first note of a song he had never heard before but somehow already knew. He looked away. He had no choice, or at least, that was what he told himself for weeks afterward. The truth sitting underneath that belief was more complicated. Kale had been promised to Isolde Crane since they were both teenagers. It was not a love match, neither of them pretended otherwise. Isolde was the daughter of Elder Crane, the most influential figure in the Eastern Pac territories. The 2 families had been at the edge of conflict for a generation. This marriage was the thread holding that fragile piece together. Walk away from it, and the thread snapped. And when threads like that snapped, people got hurt. Kale understood this in his bones. It was the first lesson his father had ever taught him. A king belongs to his people before he belongs to himself. So he went back to his palace. He sat down at his long table, covered in maps and letters and treaties. He told himself that what he felt in that hall was just a feeling, and feelings passed. But he found reasons to travel west. He told his council it was about border infrastructure. He told his beta, a man named Darren who had known him since childhood, that it was about trade routes. Darren nodded quietly and said nothing, but his eyes said quite a lot. Kale saw Seraphine 3 more times before either of them spoke honestly about what was happening. Each time, the conversation lasted longer. Each time, the walk back to his horse felt shorter than it should have. On the 3rd visit, they were sitting beside a slow river at the edge of the settlement when she looked at him and said, very simply, "You know what this is." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Yes." She nodded. She didn't smile. She looked at the water and said, "And what are you going to do about it?" He didn't answer that day. He answered 2 weeks later. He sent word asking her to come to the palace for a medical consultation. One of the pack's injured members needed care beyond what the local healers could provide. It was a real need, but the real reason was that he had made a decision and he needed to look at her face while he delivered it. She arrived in the late afternoon. He met her in the east corridor, away from the main halls, away from anyone who might overhear. He was composed. He had practiced what he wanted to say, which in itself said a great deal about the kind of man he was. He told her she was his true mate. He said it plainly, the way he said all difficult things, without decoration, without softening. He said he had never felt anything more certain in his life. Then he told her he could not choose her. He explained the alliance. He explained the consequences of breaking it. He explained that 4 generations of difficulty had finally reached a point of stillness, and that stillness depended on him doing what he had agreed to do. He was a king. He had made a promise. There were people whose lives ran on the stability he provided. She listened to every word. She did not cry. She did not argue. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked him one question. "Is this what you choose?" she said, "or is it just what you were too afraid not to?" He had no answer for that. He had thought he did, but when she asked it directly, and he opened his mouth, nothing came out. She looked at him for another second. Then she picked up her bag, thanked him for the honesty, and walked out. The wedding happened 4 months later. It was a large, well-organized event. There were speeches and formal blessings, and a long table of important guests. Isolde looked composed, and exactly as she always did, graceful in the performance of a role she had been prepared for since childhood. And Cale stood beside her and said the right words at the right times. He was very good at that. In the months that followed, the palace went on as it always had, meetings and decisions and long evenings over maps. His council said he was growing into his authority. They used words like focused and decisive. Darren said less than usual, which for Darren meant something. Cale noticed, without fully admitting it, that he was sleeping fewer hours, that the decisions felt heavier than they used to, that the silence at the end of the day, which he had once preferred, now felt less like peace and more like an empty room. He told himself it would pass. Then he noticed that Seraphine had disappeared. It wasn't dramatic. She hadn't left a letter or created a scene. She had simply, quietly, stopped being there. She left her post at the healer's house. She didn't return to her family in the border clans. No one knew exactly when she had left or where she had gone. She was just gone, the way a lamp goes dark between one breath and the next. A year after the wedding, everything Cale had sacrificed to hold together came apart anyway. It came out slowly, through careful investigative work by Darren and a few trusted members of the palace staff. Elder Crane had been moving resources, quietly, methodically, into a rival faction that had been working for years to weaken Cale's authority. The marriage had never been about peace between 2 bloodlines. It had been about placing Crane influence inside the palace through Isolde, who was herself completely innocent of all of it. When Isolde found out, she was the one who came to Cale. She sat across from him in the council room and laid out everything she had found in her father's letters. Her hands were steady, but her voice was not. She had been used by her own family, dressed up as a peace offering, and sent to serve a purpose she had never agreed to. Cale sat across from her and felt the full weight of what he had done land on him at once. He had turned away from his true mate for an alliance. The alliance had been built on a lie. He had lost the woman and gained nothing. Worse than nothing, he had gained the knowledge that he had chosen caution over truth, and caution had failed him anyway. He sat in the throne room that night, alone, long after every candle burned low. Then he asked Darren to find Seraphine. It took 4 months. She was living in a neutral settlement between 2 pack territories, a small, quiet place that belonged to no one in particular and asked nothing of the people who came to live there. She was known simply as Sarah. She still worked as a healer. She was trusted there. People came to her door at all hours, and she opened it without complaint. She had not gone there to hide. She had gone there because it was a place where she could be exactly who she was, without needing to be anything else. Cale read the report in his study late at night. He read it twice, then he folded it and held it for a while before he made his decision. He went alone. No announcement, no guards, no title. He arrived at the settlement on a gray morning and knocked on her door himself. She opened it. She saw him. Something moved across her face, complicated and quick, before she settled into calm. She stepped aside to let him in. He sat down, He told her everything. The Crane betrayal, the collapse of the alliance, the nights in the throne room. He didn't frame any of it as an excuse. He wasn't asking her to feel sorry for him. He was simply telling her the truth, which was something he should have been better at a long time ago. When he finished, she folded her hands on the table and looked at him steadily. "What do you want from me now?" she asked. He said, "I don't know if I have the right to ask anything, but I'm asking anyway. I want to try, not for the throne, not for an alliance, not for anything except the thing I walked away from. I know I can't undo what I did. I'm not here to ask you to forget it. I'm here because I finally stopped choosing everything else over the truth." She was quiet for a long time. She didn't give him an answer that day. She asked him to leave, and told him she would think. 2 weeks passed. Kale went back to his palace. He did not send letters. He did not send Darren. He waited, which was the hardest thing he had ever done, because he was a man who had spent his entire life in motion, and waiting felt like standing still at the edge of a very high place. On the 15th day, a messenger arrived at the palace gate. The message had no letter, no words. It was a small bundle of dried herbs, the kind used in border healing traditions. Anyone else would not have known what it meant. Kale knew. He rode back to the settlement the following morning. When he arrived, Seraphine was standing outside her door. She was dressed simply, as she always was. She had a bag over one shoulder, not packed with everything she owned, just what she needed for now. She looked at him carefully. Then she said, "I'm not coming back to be a queen. I'm not coming to fill something empty in you. I'm coming because I choose to, because I want to, and the moment that changes, I will leave, and I will not explain myself twice." He nodded. He said, "I understand." She walked toward the horse beside him, and they rode back together. Not as a king returning with a prize, not as a story with a tidy ending, just as two people who had taken the long, painful way around to the place they were supposed to reach, and who both understood, without saying it out loud, that getting there didn't erase the road. It just meant they were finally ready to stop walking in the wrong direction. Some lessons cost everything to learn. Some people leave so that when they come back, you finally know how to receive them. And some thrones, no matter how solid they look, are only as strong as the truth the person sitting on them is willing to live by. Kale learned all three of those things. He learned them late. He learned them the hard way. But he learned them.